Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Good afternoon, Dan Proft, and joining me on this edition of Illinois Rising is Illinois Policy Institute President and CEO John Tillman. John, one of the issues that the Chicago City Council has taken up recently is that of smokeless tobacco, because the pension issue has been solved and the city's finances are righted, and Chicago Public Schools are producing educated children ready for success in life at the collegiate level or in the workforce, so they can focus on things like whether Cubs and White Sox players are chewing tobacco during their baseball games. This idea, as is always the case, first started in L.A., New York, and of course, if something starts in L.A. and New York and it's a bad idea, you can count on Alderman Ed Burke to pick it up and try and implement it in Chicago, which is exactly what they've done.
Well, and it's fascinating to me, as you've pointed out, it's not exactly like we don't have bigger problems to solve. But the other thing I think is ironic is it's for the children, Dan. It's for the children. Unlike, say, the drunken alcohol consumption all over stadiums, all over North America, particularly here in Chicago, that's okay. And by the way, you know why that's okay? It generates a lot of revenue. Smokeless tobacco, probably not so much. Otherwise, they wouldn't do this.
Well, this is again one of these, don't do this. This is so bad for you, except do it. We're counting on you doing it. We've already budgeted for and spent the money we expect to realize from you doing it. So it's the typical scam that is run on the body politic, and nobody is better at that than Chicago politicians. Let's bring in an expert in the area. He's a former Major League Baseball player, spent more than a decade in the show. First drafted, I think, a first-round pick of the Cincinnati Reds, if I'm not mistaken. I remember him well. C.J. Nitkowski, who is
former member of my Profiteers fantasy baseball team.
Oh, very nice. Now he's a Major League Baseball analyst for Fox Sports and the Major League Baseball Network Radio, as well as CBS Sports Radio. C.J., thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, and apologies to your fantasy team.
Well, CJ, I want to call you when we're done here. We're doing our draft in a week or so, and I've got a lot of pressure.
Yeah,
a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So, John,
I understand.
John's a big Detroit Tigers fan, and so you spend a good time of the year with the Tigers.
That's true. I'll be at opening day for about the 26th time out of the last 30 years.
I mean,
that's fantastic. It's going to be a good year for the Tigers.
It's going to be a good year for the Tigers.
I mean, didn't exactly put up Verlander numbers, but nonetheless.
No, that's
CJ, you wrote a piece prior to Chicago instituting the ban on smokeless tobacco and going to police the dugouts of Major League Baseball stadiums here and Major League teams that come to play the Cubs and the White Sox. This was when L.A. first moved on this, and you basically found this to be a rather silly idea in the grand scheme of things. Explain your position as a former Major League player.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't use smokeless tobacco. I used it a little bit over the course of my career, but never regularly, and it was a pretty easy decision for me. Once,
so you used, but you didn't inhale, as a president once said.
I went to the Clinton route, but no, it was never an issue for me, and so I want to be clear on that I'm not sticking up for something that I want to do or I want other people to do. I don't endorse its use at all. It's awful for you. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Smokeless tobacco is bad for you, but what I don't like, and I think what a lot of players don't like, is we've seen some quotes from players now over these last couple weeks as more and more cities are chiming in. Now New York is the next one to put this on the table, and so Yankees and Mets players and visiting players coming in are also going to have to deal with it. The thing about it is it just feels so disingenuous to me that this is actually something that is concerned for kids and for people and trying not to promote smokeless tobacco use. It's different from smoking, right? I mean, I can't get cancer if I'm sitting next to a guy who is using smokeless tobacco. There's never a fight in the stands because people are having too much smokeless tobacco, right? But there is when they're drinking too much beer, right? It is, things do get uncomfortable. We do have some dicey situations in the parking lot and in the stands because, people will sit there and be allowed to drink as much beer as they want, or at least to some degree they try to keep an eye on it, and they stop sales after the seventh inning. But I think a lot of us can get drunk in 2 hours. So, that part of it, I don't like to feel that it just feels really disingenuous in trying to embark on players' rights. It's a legal product, and these guys it's legal for them to buy buy it. It's legal for them to use it, as much as it is an awful habit to have. I just hate the idea of cities stepping in and trying to infringe on players' right to use smokeless.
So Dan, here we have a contrast. CJ, a principled stand, versus Alderman Ed Burke, a political expediency grandstanding stand. Pretty typical.
Yeah, and this is, frankly, CJ, the position that you're outlining is the position that Joe Madden, the manager of the Cubs, has taken as well. I'm not advocating or endorsing the product, but, these are adult men. And they can make these decisions, and we don't need a Chicago police officer stationed in the dugout to monitor the smokeless tobacco usage or lack thereof of players. Although it was funny, we talked about this on the morning show that I do on this radio station, and we had a couple of Chicago cops call in saying, you have no idea, there's going to be so many applications to have the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox beat because I'll get to sit in the dugout and watch baseball all summer.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you always have a cop in there anyway, for the most part. We always did those years in Detroit, which was great just from a security standpoint.
Right.
You always have a police officer at the end, which is really nice. And I don't think they're going to care either. There's probably a lot of police officers that also use chewing tobacco. There's a lot of truckers that use chewing tobacco. There's a lot of people that serve our country in the military who I've talked to who use smokeless tobacco. So this is not just restricted to baseball players, and those people have influence on what goes on. I think the big thing, one of the things that sticks out to me, and this is just kind of a stickler for me in general, is whose responsibility is it? Like, for parents, I encourage them, and I understand athletes and celebrities have influence, but you got to step in here, right? Do not let these people raise your children. They're not capable of raising your children. They're not invested in raising your children the way that you should be. So if I bring my sons to the clubhouse or we're watching a game and their favorite player is chewing tobacco, there's that opportunity for me to have that conversation with them and say, you know what, this guy's a great player and he's great at what he does, but that part of his life, that's a mistake that he's making there, and here's why. And you're going to be faced with that decision when one of your 13-year-old buddies gets a hold of a can of dip and puts it in front of you and say, come on, man, let's try this stuff. That's your turn. You're going to have to make a decision, and it's my job, not a Major League Baseball player's job. It is my job to prepare him for that moment and understand why he should be saying no to that. And I just don't like the idea that we're going to put this on Major League Baseball players. It just feels so disingenuous.
Yeah, and to that point, disingenuous, if the politicians that are moving to ban the product from use at Major League stadiums, I mean, if it's so bad and you're so serious about it, why don't you just make the product illegal? I mean, this is the same argument as cigarettes, but it's disingenuous, like you say, because they want the revenue from it, but they want the political capital that comes from pretending to stand up for kids against, the scourge of smoking and smokeless tobacco and associated products.
Absolutely, and I think that's how everybody feels about it, and that's why it just feels so fake. And it's about, like you said, gaining political favor and saying, I care about your kids. Well, how come I can drink as much as I want at a ballpark, and I'm not going to, we don't hear about people getting in car accidents on the way home from events because they had too much smokeless tobacco, right? You're not killing people because you're dipping. I tell you a quick story that I was on an airplane last year, and a vet I knew was a vet. It was pretty obvious. He sat down next to me, prosthetic arm, prosthetic leg. He lost both his left arm and his left leg fighting in Afghanistan. And he sits next to me, and a super nice guy, was really chatty, and we were talking. And he says to me, he goes, "Hey man, is it okay with you if I have a dip on the plane?" I said, yeah, of course. What do I care? It's not going to affect me. He goes, well, you're not allowed to use chewing tobacco on airplanes. He's like, but I just, still dealing with all of his issues from a couple of tours of duty, and says, it's hard for me to relax on planes, and I just need to have a dip. I said, of course, man, don't think twice about it. Go ahead. Well, he's holding his empty water bottle, and as the stewardess is coming around to clean the plane or clear garbage before we take off, says to him, sir, can I take your water bottle? He says, no, thank you. I'm going to hold on to it. And she knew exactly what he wanted it for, and that was so they could spit his dip into it. And she goes, sir, you know that smokeless tobacco is not allowed on airplanes. He goes, oh, that's not why. I just want to hold on to it. And she kind of gave him a look, and she's like, oh, I'll be keeping an eye on you. And I was like, God, why are they making such a big deal about this? I mean, how many times have you seen, drunk people on airplanes? I mean, it's out of control with the animals that you can now bring on airplanes, but we're going to bust this guy's chops. A guy who served our country, who's literally given up limbs to protect our freedom, we're going to bust his chops about using smokeless tobacco. He took his dip. No harm, no foul. Nobody was hurt, and he was able to get through his flight without any issue. And I just feel like sometimes we pick the wrong battles, and a lot of times it just doesn't seem to make a ton of sense.
Well said.
CJ, have you gotten any blowback from coming out with a stand that's principled like this from those who are advocates for the nanny state?
No, not really. I haven't heard anything about it,
Right.
which is always good. I think, I try to be, for me, I never apologize about being somewhat of a player apologist. I think in what I do as a former player in the media, that's kind of the first thing I'm thinking about is player rights, but I try to be fair as well. But I think this was one piece that represents how a lot of players feel about it. What I'd like to see, listen, I love the idea of government getting involved and saying, we got to get the word out. Smokeless tobacco is terrible for you. Let me see some more education programs. Let me see some more PSAs. Put a big picture of David Wright up in New York. Put a big deal up of Kyle Schwarber or Anthony Rizzo in Chicago with here's the stats on what smokeless tobacco does and how it can kill you and how it can give you cancer. Let's scare some people with those messages. Not, hey, you might see a guy from 500 feet away that may or may not have a dip in, and we're going to go ahead and bust his chops. That would mean more to me. That would carry more weight. Education, making sure these kids understand maybe they're not getting the parental influence at home, but make sure that they get the word out and they understand just how dangerous this stuff can be.
He is C.J. Nikowski, a former big leaguer, now a MLB analyst for Fox Sports and for MLB Network Radio and CBS Sports Radio. C.J., thanks so much for joining us. Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Great talking with you guys.
Take care.